Headwinds, tightening budgets, investor caution. The economic landscape is looking a little different these days. So how does a nimble startup not just survive, but potentially even thrive in a recession? Welcome to the Manage Chaos podcast, where we give you the startup business rundown in less time than it takes for you to get to work. I'm Rachel Anderson.
And I'm Katrina Purcell.
And today we are talking about that dreaded R word and how to survive a recession as a startup. First of all, I just need it to be known, R's are usually my favorite letter to start words with. And so
you do generally enjoy R's.
I do. True. I really do. I don't know if that has anything to do with my personal brand, aka first name, but recessions, they're not a friendly R word.
They are not a friendly R word. I do have to say though, somehow I was talking to someone about my career trajectory and all of my pivots, and I seem to have a habit of making big career moves during, financial crises or global pandemics. And to be fair, when I started my company, there was no crisis. And so maybe this is my fault, unclear. But I did manage to turn the financial crisis of 2008 into a positive for me. So I think that we can probably spin that into a way that startups can turn this into a positive.
The positive mentality, optimism, glass half full mentality.
Exactly.
As long as we're going with glass half full, I was recently looking at some data and statistics about businesses that were opening within the COVID timeframe, which also had its own kind of weird financial market, business market situation, right? And what it showed was that generally people took chances on new businesses or unknown founders more than they did before and after, once things felt a little bit more stable, which I thought was such a fascinating data point. And it wasn't clear if investors were really taking the chance or if people were incentivized more to try and start their own thing to compensate for the unknown. But I think it's
or people were really bored of being at home. And so they were like, hey, maybe I should invest in my friends.
100%. Yeah. I don't know. But, we're here now. We're in another weird moment, right?
We are. And we should say, I guess, that it is not an official recession. And of course, we won't know that, right? It's a term for looking back and seeing different factors. So we don't know, but it is in the news and it is being bubbled up.
Yes. I think that's a really good caveat on this entire episode. I know we did say the R word, but you're right. You're totally right. We are not financial forecasters. We are not fortune tellers. So either way you look at it, we're just here to give you some help.
Yeah.
So let's start with that help. What are the immediate priorities? Maybe it's not the big R word, but there's lots of roller coaster financial things for businesses as it relates not to their business, but to the economy with which they have to play in, right? Whether that's whatever. So what are the immediate priorities that they should focus on when this starts to be part of the conversation?
I was just talking with a founder this morning, and what she mentioned was everything just feels looming. It just feels like there's so many things, so many unknowns, so many things are looming, and it feels hard to set a direction and stick with a direction. And I think the number one thing is obviously cash is king, right? And so keeping things close to the vest, keeping your expenses very closely monitored, keeping an eye on that burn rate, especially if you're not cash flow positive yet. So making sure that you're really analyzing and that every expense is truly worth it, but not at the expense of continuing your operations, right? And so making sure that you're not over-engineering, looking at that burn rate and creating something that actually makes things more complicated for your team to get things done. Because the number one thing to look at is customer retention. Keeping the customers that you currently have is so important. And this is really a double-edged sword because obviously they're also looking to cut budgets because they're keeping an eye on their cash flow, right? Which means that you have to really not be the first thing that they cut. You have to be delivering value. You have to be solving their problem. You have to really understand also how to adjust. So if a customer comes to you and says, hey, I really need to cut my burn rate, I need more cash flow, work with them, right? Figure out how you can both sort of get to a point where they're still seeing value, they're paying what they can afford to pay, you're retaining the customer, you're still getting some income in, even maybe if it's not as much as you were before. So making sure that those customers are happy, that they're getting value, that they're really excited about what you're doing. Reevaluating that value prop and adjusting if needed. So if those customers come to you and say, hey, this is more of a luxury item, it's not a necessity, how do you potentially adjust to be a necessity? How can you make sure that your customers see you as something they must keep? And then the most important one from my perspective is really managing your team morale. So being open and honest. I worked with a startup at one point that was having cash flow issues, and they didn't want the team to know. And the unfortunate part is, even though they didn't want the team to know, the team knew. And instead of having facts, there was rumors flying, right? A rumor mill flying, and people were worried about their jobs, which then caused a lot of really good people to quit because there were all these rumors flying. No one knew what was happening. The founder really didn't want to talk to the team. He didn't want to let the team know because he thought it would spark fear. And it really was the opposite. By not saying something, it sparked fear, and he lost some good people. And by that point decided to finally speak up and say what was going on, that everything was fine, right? We were monitoring, we were evaluating. And we didn't expect to be making any cuts. We were just going to delay some bonuses and things like that. But unfortunately, those good people had already left by that point because he wasn't open and honest with them.
Yeah, it's a really good point about transparency in these moments, because part of my career has been in communications and change management. And something that I learned early and now talk to leaders about all the time is that if you don't think there's a narrative here, that means you don't know what the narrative is. It's not that it doesn't exist. And that is true of brand. That's true of how your company culture is forming. And it's true in these moments of crisis. So really, the avoidance of saying something is saying something, and you just don't have control of what that thing is. So I think that that's a really good additional point.
Your team is watching the same news you're watching. Right? They're seeing the same things that you're seeing. And in the absence of you dialing them in, even to a certain level, you don't have to tell them everything. They don't need to know all of your cares and concerns, but to a certain level helps them to contextualize what they're seeing in the news and understand that it's not them that, is going to be in the next round of layoffs, or that you're doing everything you can possible to make sure that they're not. And that makes them feel more secure.
Yeah. So if a business is out there and they're like, okay, we're on this path where we're trying to keep our team informed and we're looking where our lean operations are, we're doing some of this, like, I don't want to say basic, because sometimes basic people interpret as easy or like quick, and it's not either of those things, but like some of these like basic checks. How can startups start strategically adjusting their growth plans that maybe have to take a plan B route?
Yeah.
Because of what's happening. Like, what does that look like to weather?
So hopefully when you were creating your strategic plans, you had the, really aggressive growth goals, you had the midline, and then you had your base case. And maybe you're actually now going to be turning more towards that base case. And if you've done strategic planning in such a way that you already know, which is why it's really good to do this when things are great. But when you create those strategic plans, if you create that base case, you're able to then already know from a time when things were great what you would have cut. Because when it comes time to actually cut, when things are tough, it becomes much harder to actually make those decisions. And so it's why it's so important to actually have those conversations during your strategic planning, not assuming everything's going to be rosy and rainbows, and that there could be trouble. Things might not go to plan. What would we cut? One of the things that we just spent most of the semester in my operations management class talking about this, but lean operations, right? Evaluating, eliminating all forms of waste. So really starting to look at what's happening in the company and what is wasteful. We don't always take a hard look at things that we're doing to know, is it adding value? In my opinion, innovation is never wasteful, but you can do innovation with guardrails, right? You can think about things by ensuring that you're solving legitimate customer problems and problems that customers see as sort of life-threatening to their business, or problems that they see as necessities, not nice to have. So time spent with those customers is never wasted time, because it gets you closer to the people who are paying you for your service or your product, and it helps you to better align yourself to what they need. Being cautious about hiring, but also being creative about hiring, right? So getting fractionals, getting people who can come in part-time, creating a team full of people who are very highly skilled, but might not want to work full-time. And that's great, because then you're not taking on a full-time salary and the load of benefits and things like that come along with it. And then really thinking about how you're marketing, right? So going to the more strategic high ROI channels, right? Maybe there's less events. Events are typically such a heavy cost and don't always have that return on it. I think events, in my opinion, are something to do during good times. They're definitely, it's a good way to get your brand out there. It's a good way to kind of blanket, potential industry or potential set of your ICP, but it's not always the best way to close. Right. And so focusing more on environments where you're definitely going to close deals, where, again, you're spending this time with the customer. Maybe this is the time, if you haven't implemented a customer loyalty program or a customer referral program, starting to think about how can you start to lower the cost of acquiring customers and how can you make sure you hold them.
You just said so many great things.
That was a lot of word vomit.
No, but I like it. So I had a couple thoughts I'm going to try and touch on, but the first is on the events one. Like, you're right. And I've also seen events as being really strategic lead closers for certain kinds of business. And so then that made me think about, this is really an opportunity for businesses to not make assumptions about what works for them, where you can get on stage in front of people, right? So like maybe there's a different form you need to take at the event or in your marketing or at the thing. But at the bottom line is, if you don't know what converts best for you, then don't make those assumptions. That should be your first thing. Like in a hard time, do more of the thing that you know for sure works the best.
Yep.
Whatever that is. And I think that that's a perfect segue into something else you talked about, which is the innovation piece. I think some of our best innovations came from moments where you were forced to innovate. It was a requirement because you had to be able to solve a problem. And in some ways, that's the moment now, right? If you're not innovating in a way where the customer can truly get the problem solved for them, then you become luxury versus pivotal and part of that new conversation. So in that way, I've worked with a couple different companies that thrive in other people's hard times, which is a really icky thing to think about, that there's businesses, but also like people need businesses in those moments, right? Like in a hurricane, for example, you need a company that's willing to come in with a dumpster truck and help you like take out the bricks and the wood and the whatever from the house that's fallen down, right? Like reasonable, good services. So there are opportunities even in this moment. So do, startups look at that as a way to not just survive what's happening, but actually maybe gain some ground or opportunities because of this special moment?
I think you have to not be precious about the plan. Right? So things are probably not going to go to plan. If you were able to plan all the different things that have happened this year, then you probably should have played the lotto and maybe not be running a business.
Yeah, buy me a ticket too. Come on. I could use it.
Exactly. So I think you cannot be precious about how you thought you were going to go about something or the exact numbers that you were going to hit, right? You need to start to understand how to ask the tough questions, but also how to answer the tough questions, because your investors could potentially be coming to you asking hard questions. Your team might be coming to you asking hard questions, and you're going to have to start coming up with answers that are not necessarily, well, look at the plan, right? This is when real leadership comes to fruition. There are opportunities though, right? There's a lot of mass layoffs happening. There's a lot of talent that goes out into the market and is more open to potentially working in somewhat unconventional ways where you could get them. We just talked about fractional, part-time, where you can actually sort of snap up the ability to have someone on your team who isn't full-time, who isn't costing you, a full-time salary and benefits, but who has the level of experience that you need, right? That you might not have been able to access before because they had a full-time corporate job and they weren't able to do that kind of advising on the side. So keeping an eye as well on potential consolidation. Now you might be the acquiree. Hopefully you're the acquirer, but thinking about, also not just from a pure M&A standpoint, but would you acquire someone just to have their book of business? So is there a company that's not doing great but their customers are perfect customers for you? And could you acquire that company just to get their access to their customers, right? To essentially, or talent. So maybe they have some key talent and it's basically an acqui-hire. You're going to essentially acquire them, but it's purely because you want the people who are working there. Or maybe they have some piece of the product that would round out your product and, they're not doing well, right? And so this comes back to what you had said before, like that might feel a little icky, but at the same time, you might be keeping their vision alive, right? You might be helping to continue employing people. You're helping their customers. it comes back to the bottom line that we've talked about on multiple episodes. It's really about customers. It's about listening, right? Listening, all capital letters, like just listening. What are the customers asking for? What kind of questions are they asking? What are the challenges that they're having? What are things that they need solved that are very key to their business, that are not nice to haves, but are must haves, right? Figuring out how to be the most cost effective and efficient solution for your customers. So if there's any time in your life to do a price cut potentially, right? Figure out how you could run your operations more efficiently and run a deal for some of your customers if you feel like they're very affected by what's happening in the current climate, because building that loyalty will help those customers not only speak more about you to their other business friends, but also it will keep them sort of with you through that hard time because they know that you were committed to them.
Yeah, I think that that's a
it
really
might feel
good...
unconventional, but
Yeah, but I think that these are really great points, right? I sort of think of it as like, okay, the fog rolls in. So how do you clear through that? You get really focused on the one thing that can help guide you through that kind of unclear weather event.
Yeah.
How far can I take this analogy? And that's really about the customer, right? You get funnel focused on them. And as long as you make sure that you prioritize their needs, that customer service, the touch points, the interactions, that's the way that you make it through.
Now is not the time to go by your gut, right? Like now is the time to listen to the customer and go by exactly what they're telling you, because 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you exactly what they need. Now is not the time to build some pie in the sky thing that you think is what they need, right? It's more about being data driven.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All right. So we know recessions are tough, but they can also be that defining moment for innovation and resilience as a company. So by focusing really on those core values and managing your resources wisely, and as you said, really staying agile, not close-fisted and tough with what you think should have been able to happen, that's where you're going to be able to not only survive, but really emerge stronger on the other side of that moment. So thank you so much for listening today for this episode about how to survive a big, scary R word, recession, or other kinds of economic instability. We will definitely talk to you next time. But in the meantime, you should definitely go subscribe on YouTube to be sure that you are the first to know about every episode that we have released. And we will talk to you shortly on the next episode of the Managed Chaos podcast.